for this episode of Barriers to Break, we are going to do something different. We're going to learn from a true giant in the furniture industry. We have with us Rakshita Agrawal, Director and General Manager of the furniture vertical at Wayfair. Wayfair doesn't need much introduction, but with a tiny chance that you don't know about Wayfair, it's a Fortune 500 company. It holds one third market share in the online furniture e-commerce space, and it has a whopping 20,000 selling on the platform. Rakshita herself has had a very interesting journey. She's moved from academia to consulting to now leading a prominent vertical within Wayfair. And we're excited to hear her story today. So, Rakshita, I'll let you sort of start by introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about what led to Wayfair and the journey before that.
Thank you, Divyanshu. Excited to join you on this podcast. So, a little bit about me. I started out going to IIT Roorkee for undergrad, grew up in central India, Madhya Pradesh, and then moved to the US to do a PhD in chemical engineering at Georgia Tech. And as I was nearing the end of my PhD program, I realized I'd been doing chemical engineering for almost 9 years by then. And frankly, I was ready for a change. So, the thought process was let's try out something different. And then if it doesn't work out, I can always go back to doing petroleum, oil, and gas, whatever it takes. And so I joined BCG right after my graduation. And it was very exciting. Like, I actually never thought of going back to chemical engineering. And the most exciting bit was you get exposure to several different types of industries, companies, cultures, different topics ranging from strategy to operations to people and organization. So I was having a lot of fun, and before I knew it, it was like 9 years at BCG. And then again, the so maybe the 9 years is the common theme here. But then I was sitting back and thinking, if I want to be a career consultant, if I want to be a consultant forever, and really, the answer was no. And again, the thought process was, let's try out something different. And if it doesn't work out, I can always go back to consulting. And as I as I look back on the last 2 to 3 years of my BCG career, I was working primarily with large industrial or oil and gas, so pretty traditional types of companies. And the common thread that was across my different projects in the last 2 3 years was, how can these companies get value out of digital technology? Because for many of these, it was still kind of a concept, right? In retail space and media space, digital ruled the game at that point, and this is like 6 years ago. But these companies were still trying to figure out where they should invest resources, how should they change culturally to get value out of digital. And digital was very exciting for these companies because if you think about oil and gas, 200 billion revenues, you multiply even a small percentage improvement with a large number, you get a large number. So the concept of like digital technology was exciting to me, and I knew that that had to be a part of whatever I did next. And then I had spent like 9 years consulting with traditional companies with large physical assets and operations. So marriage of the two would be the sweet spot for the next thing that I did. And Wayfair was one of the few companies which were born digital, but with a significant physical presence and footprint. And yeah, so that's what led me to Wayfair. Boston being a great place to raise a family and things like that. So that's how I ended up in at Wayfair about 4 years ago at this point.
Got it. Got it. And when you were sort of evaluating your options, what was the most exciting aspect about Wayfair? I'm assuming there were a ton of other e-com portals. There was Amazon. There's a ton of others that you could have gone to. But what was it specific about Wayfair that excited you?
So I'd say two things. One was just the getting a chance to see firsthand how a digital first company operates. And I've actually found that to be true in every aspect of what we do: pricing, marketing, supply chain, um, category management. Like, technology is at the heart of it. People just think about it that way, which was pretty exciting. So that was like right out the gate, something that I was very excited about learning. And then Wayfair has a very people first culture. So think about customers, employees, suppliers, in all sorts of ways. The people that we interact with is just heavily people focused. And I did get a chance to learn about that beforehand in my due diligence. So those are the two things that I was pretty excited about.
Got it. Got it. And I think Wayfair is also exciting because, I mean, if you look at the whole sort of e-commerce game, a lot of vertical focused companies failed at it, right? Like Amazon kept taking market share from it, and the scale at which Wayfair operates is pretty crazy. So I'd love to know what you think differentiates Wayfair from the rest of the lot.
Yeah, well, I've only worked at Wayfair, so I'm going to share what we think differentiates Wayfair, or what I we think we're doing well. So a few things come to mind. One is just thinking about home as a category and being focused on that. It's a highly emotive category, so it's pretty different. If you're buying a sofa or a bed for your house, the process and the emotions are very different from like buying toilet paper or batteries. And so the platform itself, it's really built for browsing. And we have endless aisles, so that means that you can get pretty lost in looking for stuff, so you have to inspire, you have to personalize to what the person looking at might like. And so there's a lot of focus on the overall end-to-end customer experience, because the key is that you deliver a good experience and then you keep people coming back. And then the second one in my mind is investments that we have made in specialized large parcel supply chain. And again, this is end to end. So starting from Asia or Mexico or wherever the goods are coming from, all the way to they get delivering to the customers. The fact that these are large, bulky pieces of furniture and require special handling, still we want to deliver with speed. Like all of that is built specialized to by Wayfair. And then the last thing I would add is I hit on it in my first point is the endless island personalization is key. And therefore, like the concept of having something for everyone. And so focus on maintaining a really large assortment, which still is pretty solid in terms of the product itself and how it's presented and all of that. Like that's really very core to what Wayfair does. And what that means is the type of sellers that we have on the platform, they don't fit a certain bill. They come in all shapes and sizes in terms of their overall size, in terms of the selection they carry and the value they provide.
Got it. Got it. And just to sort of double click on the supplier side, so is the model of onboarding suppliers different from other marketplaces, or is it fairly similar? Like, can anybody come and sell on Wayfair, or would you sort of handpick sellers that come on Wayfair?
We don't so much as handpick. We just want to make sure that they pass through a rigorous assessment process. So they should be legitimate supplier. They should be not misrepresenting product, those sort of things. But other than that, yeah, any supplier that's legitimate can sell on Wayfair.
Got it. And are the models of engaging with all suppliers similar, or do you have different models of engaging with suppliers as well?
So the platform is a level playing field. So as long as you have a product which customers would love, you can succeed on the platform. In terms of engagement, we are heavily investing in the platform to build like self-serve tools and stuff. So we are leveraging technology a lot. And then once you reach a certain scale, and depending on the complexity and the type of category that you play in, I think the requirements of how much in-person interaction needs to happen, it just differs, right? So it's not one size fits all. Again, we have a really large dedicated group of category managers that are there to guide suppliers to say this is how the platform works, and therefore depending on their situation, what are the different types of things that they should be leaning into, and that's just a continuous process.
Got it. Got it. And I'm assuming that a lot of suppliers would have joined the platform during COVID. And I mean, could you sort of double click on just the COVID phase a little bit? Because I think I set up a house during COVID, and I think 80% of the products I bought, right from sofas to lamps, was from Wayfair, completely end to end. So I would love to know a little bit about that phase if you can share a little bit. And I'm sure it came with a lot of challenges as sort of the market suddenly grew, the demand suddenly grew. I think IKEA was out of stock for a very long time. So I'm sure it brought opportunities, but as well as challenges. So any sort of anecdotes from that time would be great to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for being a loyal Wayfair customer. So lots of new suppliers joined the platform for sure. And that was really an outcome of demand shifting very quickly to online. So just to share with you some numbers, before COVID hit, we had about 20 million active customers on Wayfair, and it grew to 32 million. So we had a crazy influx of new customers. And that was the hope is, people who have never trusted e-commerce for buying furniture and other home goods try it, and then they like it, and then they stick with it. And that's kind of the behavior that we saw as we were tracking in our numbers, that the new customers that we acquired through COVID, they showed really strong repeat behaviors. So that was pretty exciting. Now, 2+ years after COVID, there are other factors that have impacted demand, right? Like demand has slowed because some categories got pulled forward. Like if you think about desks and home office, like whoever needed a desk probably bought it at that point. A lot of entertainment type categories, like once things started opening up, people started stocking up on outdoor furniture and living room furniture. So some of those categories, they saw a huge spike, and then they're kind of, the demand got pulled forward, so they're not as strong at this point. um so those were the major things. Yeah, the other thing we saw during COVID is omnichannel was a winner. So what ended up happening is, like you mentioned, IKEA was out of stock. It was just not IKEA, but like several large retailers, because demand was just so high. And the carriers got congested, so there was overseas supply chain constraints which led to out of stock. But then domestic carriers also, their supply chains got constrained, so then delivery times became super long. And so retailers who could basically receive orders online but have the option of picking up at the store, like customers really gravitated towards that, which basically told us that the expectation of speed of delivery is really super high. Even if you're buying an expensive sofa, like people want it delivered within 2-3 days or some reasonable time frame. So I think all of those expectations are here to stay in my mind. And post COVID, we feel a little bit like the pendulum has swung quite a lot in the other direction at this moment, because, customers have discretionary spend, but they're spending it massively on like entertainment and travel, categories that were very depressed during COVID. And so they're not spending as much on home.
Got it. Got it. And I mean, just for the for our listeners, there might be suppliers who've thought about online, they've not, still sort of made the shift. Would be great if you can share some supplier stories, or any supplier that you've seen sort of grow massively on the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I think about suppliers, I think they fall in three large buckets. So suppliers who are really large on brick and mortar side, but they're relatively newer to e-commerce. So that's like the first bucket. The second bucket to me is suppliers who are already large in e-commerce, but they're new to Wayfair. Like maybe they're selling on other channels and they're onboarding onto Wayfair. And then there is a third bucket where they're just not big in this category. So neither offline, neither online, right? And if I look at our supplier base, like across all three of these buckets, you can find suppliers who are massively successful. And when I say massively successful, just to give you a sense of scale, we're talking about 20, 30, $50 million in annual sales. And the basic core tenets of success on the platform are the same. So to my earlier point, it's a level playing field. And we just tremendously focus on the health of the product listing. In the end, that's what matters, right? So the product should be a really good product to begin with. It should be well merchandised, should have strong reviews, should get delivered with speed, is appropriately priced with right price to value, and then should be delivered without incidents, and something that customers would just love. So, to the extent that a supplier is able to deliver that, yeah, there is no limit, right? Ultimately, like no matter where your starting point is, your starting point does dictate how long it takes for you to get to that scale. Because if you're starting with a large scale elsewhere, then all of that can translate into really strong prices, really strong merchandise, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, any supplier can achieve success.
That's good to know. And I think just because Wayfair sort of operates at this crazy scale, right? And I think you did speak about some trends that shifted post COVID. I think would just love to know where you're seeing this headed. What are the top trends? What categories are working well? What are customers now gravitating towards?
You're thinking about the overall home category?
Yeah,
Yeah.
not just from e-commerce perspective. Just I mean, e-commerce is also a reflection of what happens in the physical world, right? So what categories are you seeing strong growth in? Where would you think suppliers should be investing? And just overall, how have consumer expectations sort of shifted? And I think you did touch upon some of those points.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I think about the home industry, there are a few trends that we are observing. One is geo diversification. And I think this has been happening for quite some time, but it did get sped up during COVID. And what I mean by it is there are suppliers who are thinking about nearshoring so they can be closer to the customer, they can mitigate some of the supply chain uncertainties and risks that come with being, further away from the end customer. And then within Asia, a lot of the supply still comes from Asia. There's a lot of focus in on diversifying across different countries in Asia. And one is just diversification, but I think the other objective there is to get access to selection. Because, for instance, I hear from a number of suppliers that the quality coming out of India is different, better. The designs are really resonating with the customers, so they're looking to cover the selection that exists in other countries. So that's a big one, especially pronounced after COVID. I hit on omnichannel previously, but that definitely seems to be a trend. And that's not just specific to home, but overall e commerce, where the ability to seamlessly navigate across physical and virtual, across the different devices. If you are able to check out very quickly online, customers want to be able to do the same in the physical setting. If they're able to visualize things in the virtual setting, they want to do it on the physical. And so omnichannel is another one which we are seeing, like omnichannel players being successful. Visualization and inspiration is the third one I would mention. um, this is a highly emotive category. Customers want to visualize how certain things would look in their own space and is aligned with their own style aesthetic. And sometimes it's very difficult for them to even articulate what their style aesthetic is, right? So it's a discovery process as they look at several products. So if you can make it easier for them to do that, the discovery, the confidence, then that would go a long way. And the last one is sort of, ambiguous in my mind, but we don't know what tech innovations may come in the future, right? Like Chat GPT is one. There's been a lot of talk on how that may just transform how search works and how discovery works and marketing. And can we actually show dynamic product content depending on who's looking for stuff, right? Like, because right now, product names, product descriptions, they're quite static, but could that change based on who's looking at it? So those are just some things that come to mind as I think about what the next 5 years may look like.
And on the omni-channel point, I would like to double click. I think Wayfair is now starting its own sort of brick and mortar stores, right? So, talk to us a little bit about the why now of it, and how is the concept going to be different? How do you sort of, because on let me reiterate. So I think online you have a very large selection, right? So you have hundreds and thousands of SKUs. How do you sort of translate something like that to a brick and mortar store? Like, how do you decide what to put in the store, and how do you sort of set that expectation with customers, right? What are they going to look at when they physically visit versus what are they looking at online?
Yeah, so I think the basic motivation of getting into physical stores was very simple. So right now, e-commerce makes up about 20%, let's call it. So 20% is e-commerce, 80% is physical. If you look at industries that are heavily e-commerce, you still kind of hit that point where it's like 50-50, right? So we there is already a massive market obviously on the physical side, but we think even at the saturation point, that is still a big source of demand, and we want to be where the customers are. So that was the primary motivation. And then there are a couple of secondary things, right? So if you're buying a sofa, if you have the ability to sit on it, just increases your comfort and confidence, right? So touching and feeling, especially if it's a higher quality product, becomes very important. That's why we are leaning in heavier in our specialty brands like All Modern, Joss and Main. That's where we are opening physical stores. That's where we've started basically the journey. And then returns process becomes a little bit easier and so on. And then to answer your question on what types of products, so I think several players have done the opposite journey where they started by physical and then they moved to online. And at this point, from what we've heard, they're basically leveraging all the knowledge that they're getting online to figure out SKU selection for their physical stores. Because obviously that's not endless and space is valuable. And so that's kind of where we have started. Is we have a massive database on which SKUs resonate with the customers. How does it actually differ by geographic region, by weather, by urban versus rural? Like we have all that data, and so we are putting that to use significantly. And then in addition, forward looking trends where you don't have data, where you can use this as test and learn kind of sites. Yeah, so ultimately, both should basically feed each other.
Got it. Got it. And so if I look at sort of the retail landscape, right? So you have large retailers, then you have a lot of independent outlets, and you have some mid-sized specialty brands like Z Gallery, etc. as well. And then there's this whole trend of designers and who sort of help you set up or buy or set up your house, right? So in just observing this landscape, what are your opinions on what segments are going to grow? How is independent going to fare against now, like even Wayfair sort of stepping into the brick and mortar game, and then the designer aspect as well.
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer, to be honest, because when it comes to physical footprint, you're not going to drive several miles to get to a store that you really like, right? So point of sale, when it comes to physical locations, like several players can be successful. So it's very difficult to opine on whether small regional players will grow or not grow. We have seen some consolidation through COVID when it comes to like the retailers and the footprint. um yeah, that's kind of where I stand on this one.
Got it.
And then you also mentioned the designers. I mean, there are a few ways that it has been happening so far. There are individuals, interior designers and such, right, who are helping with, let's call it, inspiration and visualization. There have been just platforms dedicated to this. Like in my mind, the way the process works today is, if you're not hiring a designer, then you're going on like House or Pinterest or some of these websites to just figure out what exactly you want and what space resonates with you and things like that. Ideally, we integrate those things into the selling platforms, right? And then when it comes to individuals, like I think there's a ton of value they create, and we view them as a customer because Wayfair has a really large business to business vertical. And yeah, so they would be buying from Wayfair or buying from any of the other furniture suppliers, but that's kind of a different segment of the value chain in my
Got
mind.
it. And I think that's interesting because I think I really struggled to set up my house. I think it was every decision was hard, especially when you start from a blank canvas. And did feel the need for somebody to just do it for me, right? Like that would be sort of the ultimate convenience that somebody could bring to the table. And so, is that something that Wayfair plans to provide at some point to its customers buying online, like somebody to help them figure out what would work best? Or are you thinking of or is AI going to sort of be that agent in the future?
Yes and yes. So we do have design services that we offer, and we're testing into it. The goal is basically that, because if it's an in-house group, they understand our products really well. So at least that side of the equation is solved, and that's definitely something we're pursuing. And then you might have heard about the digital design studio that we launched in one of our physical locations. And in general, like, we have a technology research focused group we call Wayfair Next. And their whole goal is to look out 10 years and figure out what are the breakout technologies. And they're heavily, heavily focused on customer experience, obviously. So the digital design studio that exists right now, what it shows is there is a screen, and then there are a bunch of cards with like one product on each card. And the way it works is you lay the cards down, and then you can see, how that product looks in a virtual space. So that allows you the ability to, put multiple products together and see how they look together, or put similar products side by side. Like if you're shopping for chairs, you can put 5 chairs and see how they look. You can wiggle and move them in certain angles. You can change the lighting. So that already exists. And in my mind, we can evolve this to a point where now you're able to put in your own space instead of, one generalized space. Um, Cards become like virtual cards. So the possibilities are immense, but this is definitely a priority for us to solve, is like you said, how do you make it easier and easier? And for certain segment of customers who are tech savvy, like instead of engaging a designer, you just kind of use a virtual designer.
So Rakshita, why don't you tell us how a new supplier can get started with Wayfair, right? Like how do they, let's say they are a wholesaler, they've been doing B2B business all their life. What are the challenges? What steps do you think they need to start taking to become a Wayfair seller and be successful on the platform?
Yeah, good question. So the way the process typically plays out is, you take 2 to 3 months to just get onboarded onto the site. And then for the next 3 to 4 months, I would say the sole focus for the supplier should be to get their entire selection on the site and really just focus on, the merchandising and making sure that the products are really compelling and tell the story well. We have some programs that can help them kind of get to a certain number of reviews pretty fast, because ultimately it's really key to inspire confidence in the customers. And then once we have those steps, like you're integrated on the back end to make sure that like inventory information is flowing through correctly. Like first, I would say 6 months after onboarding are just to get the foundation right in place. And beyond that point is when you can start engaging in, how do you participate in promotional activities, or how do you drive more traffic to SKUs, and how do you test and learn using um, you know advertising and some of the other programs that we have. So that's typically how the process goes.
Got it. Rakshita, I think there's also a big question of sustainability. Maybe we can just talk a little bit about that. I think Wayfair determines a huge volume in the industry. What are some steps that Wayfair is taking, or how are you working with your suppliers to ensure a large sort of flow of sustainable products sort of make it on the website? And are you seeing that as an important criteria for onboarding new products, and are customers expecting more sustainability from you?
Yeah, sustainability definitely is a growing trend. And I think the one thing that we have been focused on is how can we cleanly communicate that information, that this product is, green and optimized for that. It comes from a supplier that's focused on sustainability. So that's the biggest thing that we have been focused on. Suppliers already, like, we see suppliers who are already catching up to this trend, and so I think we have our like fair share of selection on the site at this point. The other thing that we've focused on is diverse, like maintaining or promoting suppliers that come from diverse backgrounds. So supplier diversity is another big focus to make sure that they're appropriately represented.
Got it. And are there any plans for Wayfairs to open up for international suppliers, or is that something that already happens?
I mean, we have a fair number of suppliers that are internationally located, like from Europe and Asia and so on. So that's not a barrier. I mean, what it comes down to is generally suppliers use a combination of the Wayfair supply chain and their own supply chain. So to the extent that they are able to have their own physical warehouses and locations in the US, it doesn't matter where they're
As long as
originally
the product can
located.
reach the customer in a fair amount of time, the supplier can get onboarded essentially.
Yes, yes,
Got it.
absolutely.
I think that's all for now, Rakshita. I think you've been very generous with your time, and I think we've learned a great deal about Wayfair, the online business, and trends that will guide retail in the future. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity. Great chatting with you, Divyanshu.